I've filed 942 incident reports in my career. I've documented species that can dissolve metal with their breath. I've watched planets tear themselves apart from tectonic stress. I've recorded the death of a star from 3 light minutes away, close enough that my skin turned red from the radiation even through the shielding. None of those 942 reports scared me the way this one did. Because this one was about a child. A human child. Left alone, deliberately left alone on Krell 9. If you don't know what Krell 9 is, let me explain something to you first. Let me explain it the way I explained it to the Galactic Senate Tribunal when they called me in to testify about what happened there over the course of 10 years. I told them, imagine the worst place you've ever been to. Imagine the thing you feared most as a child under your bed in your closet in the dark at the end of the hallway. Now make that thing real. Give it teeth. Give it weight. Give it hunger. Give it an entire planet to live on. Give it 10,000 cousins and brothers and sisters, all of them bigger, all of them meaner, all of them competing with each other for food and territory and dominance. That's Krell 9. That's where they left him. A boy 6 years old, in a survival pod with 17 days of rations. And I am going to tell you what happened next. I'm going to tell you all of it, because I was the one who found him 10 years later, and I still haven't fully processed what I saw when I stepped out of my surveyor ship onto that red-soiled killing ground and heard something I did not expect to hear. I heard him laughing. Set up. Let me take you back to the beginning first. You need the context. Without the context, nothing else makes sense. The year was 2387 by Earth Standard Calendar, though on Krell 9 there's no real year, not in the way you and I understand it. There are seasons, sort of brutal cycles of heat and cold that the local fauna have adapted to over millions of years of evolution, but calling them seasons feels almost polite. Too gentle a word for what they actually are. I was 26 years old, fresh out of my 3rd year with the Biological Survey Unit. I've been assigned to the Krell 9 monitoring post, which sounds important until you understand what monitoring post means in practice. It means you sit inside an orbital station about 400 kilometers above the planet's surface. You point sensors down. You take notes. You do not, under any circumstances, go down to the surface unless you absolutely have to and you have a full tactical escort, and even then you pray. My commanding officer at the time was a woman named Commander Dirapellis. She was Vethian, tall, gray-skinned, four-armed, with the kind of calm that only people who have seen genuine catastrophe develop over time. Nothing rattled her. I'd seen her order an evacuation of a research station with the same tone she used to order lunch. Steady, measured, unafraid. She called me into her office on the morning of day 1, which is how I've always marked it in my personal records. Day 1 of the Krell 9 human incident. She had a file open on her display, a BSU incident report, fresh. The timestamp was only hours old. She said, "Macron, sit down." I sat. She turned the display so I could see it. The report was sparse. That's what I remember first, how sparse it was. It had the planet designation, the coordinates, the timestamp, and then 3 lines of text that didn't make any sense to me the first time I read them. Object of interest: single juvenile human male, age approximately 6 standard years. Delivery method: emergency survival pod, uncrewed, trajectory consistent with deliberate deployment. Status: pod confirmed, landed, seal intact, survival unknown. I looked up at Pellis. She said, "Someone dropped a child on Krell 9. I said, "That's not possible." She said, "And yet." I looked back at the report. I read it again, slower this time. Deliberately deployed, I said. That means. Someone put him in the pod, she said. Set the coordinates, fired the pod, yes. That's murder, I said. She didn't answer that directly. She just pulled up another file and said, The pod's transponder is active. We can track it. We can see it on the surface. She pointed to a topographical map of Krell 9 northern continent. The pod was a blinking blue dot. Around it on the heat sensor overlay were dozens of red shapes, slow-moving, dense, clustered. Beasts. They'll reach him within 6 hours, Pellis said. Can we extract him? She was quiet for a moment. That pause told me everything. The closest available tactical ship is 14 hours out. We've already requested emergency priority, but the relay lag means. He'll be dead in 6 hours, I said. She didn't say yes. She didn't have to. I sat in that chair in her office for a long moment, staring at that blue dot on the heat map, surrounded by all that red. I said, who does this to a child? Pellis said, someone who wants him dead and doesn't want to get their hands dirty. Now let me tell you about Krell 9. I need you to understand this place, really understand it. Because understanding Krell 9 is the only way to understand what happened over the next 10 years. It's the only way to understand how a 6-year-old human boy could survive not one day, not 1 week, not 1 month, but 10 years on the most hostile planetary surface in the known galactic arm. Krell 9 is cataloged in the BSU database as a Class 9 hostile biosphere. There are only 4 planets in the entire surveyed universe with that classification. Class 9 means, in scientific terms, that the planet's native life forms exist in a state of maximum predatory density, which is a polite way of saying that everything on that planet is a predator, everything is dangerous, and the ecosystem works on a brutally simple principle. You eat, or you are eaten. There is no third option. There is no middle ground. There are no herbivores on Krell 9. Every organism that has ever evolved on that world evolved to kill, because that was the only way to eat, and eating was the only way to survive. The planet itself is not beautiful in any way that humans typically appreciate beauty, but it has a kind of savage grandeur that I've always found difficult to describe. The sky is the color of old copper, oxidized, verdigris-tinged, with a permanent haze from the volcanic activity in the eastern mountain ranges. The light that comes through that haze is diffuse and orange-tinted, so everything on the surface looks like it's caught in a permanent late afternoon, like the sun is always setting, like the day is always almost over. The soil is dark red. Not rust red, not clay red, dark, almost brown red, the color of dried blood on stone. It's mineral-dense, volcanic in origin, and it holds heat in a way that makes the surface temperature at ground level run about 8 to 12 degrees higher than the ambient air temperature, which means that even in the cooler months, the surface of Krell 9 feels like standing near an open oven. The plant life, if you can call it that, is strange. Nothing on Krell 9 is purely photosynthetic. Even the vegetation has adapted to the predatory principle. There are trees, massive, ancient, multi-trunked things that grow in clusters, but they capture and digest insects and small animals through sticky secretions on their bark. There are ground-level growths that look like moss, but are actually colonies of microscopic organisms that work cooperatively to trap and break down anything that walks across them. There are vines that tighten. There are flowers that are actually mouths. And then there are the animals. This is where I need to be careful, because describing the fauna of Krell 9 accurately requires a certain precision that is difficult when you're also trying to convey how terrifying they actually are. The dominant megafauna are creatures the BSU catalogs as Vorthen. The local name, the name given by the handful of researchers who have studied them from a safe distance, is simply the Gray Kings. They're hexapodal, 6-limbed. The front 2 limbs are manipulator appendages, not quite hands, more like a hybrid between a fist and a claw. The middle 4 are locomotion limbs, and they use all 4 simultaneously in a rolling, powerful gait that covers ground at a speed that is, frankly, unfair for something that size. A mature Vorthen stands about 3.5 meters at the shoulder. Their hide is the same dark gray as storm clouds, rough-textured, almost armored in its density. Their eyes are forward-facing, a predator's eyes copper-colored, set in a broad, flat skull that's reinforced with dense bone structure. They're intelligent. Not sapient, not tool users, not language users, but intelligent in the way that apex predators develop intelligence. Strategic, patient, capable of cooperative hunting behaviors, able to recognize individual members of other species and remember them across months of separation. There are approximately 40 to 60,000 Vorthen on the northern continent alone. They are not the most dangerous thing on Krell 9. The most dangerous things are the Skelari, smaller, about the size of a large earth dog, but fast in a way that defies reason. They hunt in packs of 30 to 80 individuals. They communicate through a series of subsonic vibrations that humans can't hear but can sometimes feel in their chest. They coordinate their attacks with a precision that early researchers mistook for hive mind behavior. It's not a hive mind, it's just extremely sophisticated pack intelligence, refined over millions of years of cooperative predation. They don't attack the Vorthen directly. They've evolved a relationship with the Vorthen that is somewhere between scavenger and partner. They follow the Grey Kings, clean up kills, flush prey from cover, and in return the Vorthen tolerate their presence. And then below both of those there are dozens of other species. Mid-tier predators, ambush specialists, nocturnal hunters, aerial threats. A complete food chain in which the only role available is predator, and the only way to move up the chain is to be better, faster, smarter, or more ruthless than whatever is currently above you. This was the world where a 6-year-old boy's survival pod landed on day 1. I watched the pod on the heat map for 6 hours. I watched the red shapes close in around the blue dot. I prepared myself for what I was going to have to log. What kind of language you use in a BSU incident report when a child dies. I'd never had to do it before. I was trying to figure out if there was a form for it, some kind of template, or if it was the kind of thing you just had to write from scratch. The red shapes reached the pod. I held my breath. For about 40 minutes the heat map showed the cluster of signatures around the pod, dense, still, just sitting there. And then slowly they began to move away. I stared at that screen. The pod's blue dot was still active, still transmitting. "Commander," I said. Pellis was at the door. She'd been watching too. She walked over and looked at the screen without saying anything for a long moment. "The pod's sealed," I said. "They probably couldn't get in. He's still alive in there." She said, "For now." For now. The tactical ship arrived 31 hours after the pod landed. I wasn't on it. I was still on the orbital station, watching the heat map. But I spoke to the team leader, a sergeant named Callow Rain, through the comms link as they descended toward the surface. "What's his status?" Rain asked. "Pod's still transmitting," I said. "Heat signature inside is consistent with a living human juvenile." "Signatures around the pod." I looked at the heat map. The red shapes were still there, still clustered around the pod, still not dispersing. "Multiple," I said. "Could be 8 to 12 Skelari and at least 1 Vorthen within 100 meters." There was a pause on the comms. Rain said, "We're going to try a noise approach first, see if we can drive them off." "Copy that," I said. I watched the tactical ship's beacon on the map. It came down fast, straight descent, steep angle. The acoustic dispersal system they used would generate a frequency range designed to be unpleasant to most known megafauna. It was standard extraction protocol for hostile biosphere environments. What happened next is not in the official BSU report. It was in Rain's personal debrief, which I've read several times because it still doesn't make complete sense to me. The ship came down to about 80 meters above the pod's location. They activated the acoustic dispersal system. The Skelari scattered immediately. That was expected. The Vorthen, the single large signature I'd flagged, did not scatter. It moved toward the pod. "We have a Vorthen approaching the pod," Rain said over comms. His voice was very steady. I could tell from the steadiness that he was scared. "It's not dispersing. It's moving toward the extraction target." "Increase the dispersal frequency," I said. "Already maxed," he said. "It's not responding." On the heat map, I watched the large red shape stop directly over the blue dot. "It's sitting on top of the pod," Rain said, and his voice had moved from scared to something I can only describe as baffled. "It's sitting on top of it." "What?" "It's crouched over the pod. It looks like it's guarding it." I said, "That's not a behavior in any Vorthen documentation I've seen." "I know," said Rain. "That's why I'm telling you." They attempted the extraction twice more. Both times, the Vorthen didn't move from the pod. Both times when they tried to land a team, the Vorthen postured aggressively, not charging, but making its intentions unmistakably clear. After the third attempt, Rain made a command decision that almost ended his career. He retreated. He reported back to Pellis that a safe extraction was not possible without risk of engagement with a Vorthen, which under BSU protocol required a level of force authorization he didn't have. He requested authorization. Pellis escalated to the regional command. By the time the authorization question worked its way up the chain and back down, 4 days had passed. The pod's rations ran out on day 17. On day 18, the pod seal was broken from the inside. I watched it happen on the heat map. The blue dot stabilized. Then, very slowly, a small secondary heat signature emerged from the pod. Small, faint, human-sized, child-sized. Standing next to the large red shape of the Vorthen. I stared at that screen for a very long time. The child signature moved closer to the Vorthen signature. The Vorthen signature did not move away. I said very quietly to no one in particular, "What on earth is he doing?" Build tension. What he was doing, what we pieced together later from the orbital sensor data, from the Skelari behavioral logs, from everything we were able to document remotely over the following months, was surviving. Not just surviving, adapting. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like the kind of thing you say in a story to make it feel neater than it actually was. But the data is the data, and the data is what I had, and what the data showed over the following weeks and months was a pattern of behavior that I've spent years trying to find a scientific framework for, and have, in the end, settled on calling extraordinary. Day 18 to day 30. The boy, we designated him HJM01 in the official logs, human juvenile male, case 1, which I always thought was a terrible thing to call a child, stayed close to the Vorthen. Close meaning within 3 to 5 meters at almost all times. The Vorthen moved, he moved with it. The Vorthen fed, he followed after and took what he could from the kill. The Vorthen rested, he rested nearby. Now, I want to be clear about what was happening here from a biological perspective, because I've seen people romanticize this, and the romanticized version is both wrong and unfair to the reality of what that boy was actually going through. He was not in those early weeks safe. He was not comfortable. He was not part of some magical cross-species bond. He was a 6-year-old child who was starving, who was terrified, who had been left alone on a death world, and who had made the single most rational decision available to him given his circumstances. Stay close to the thing that is too big for everything else to attack. The Vorthen was not protecting him in any conscious sense. Not at first. The Vorthen tolerated him the way an apex predator tolerates a creature too small and strange to be worth the energy of attacking. He wasn't prey, he was too bizarre, too small, too different. He didn't smell right, didn't move right, didn't fit any prey pattern the Vorthen had evolved to recognize. So it ignored him, and in being ignored he was safe, and in being safe he was alive. That was it. That was the whole logic of the first month. It wasn't magic, it wasn't destiny. It was a 6-year-old kid, being the most pragmatic he'd ever had to be in his short life. The thing that changed, the thing that began to shift the dynamic from tolerated curiosity to something else, happened around day 45. A pack of Skelari came for the boy. This is documented in the sensor logs. I've reviewed the thermal imaging data hundreds of times. A pack of 11 Skelari, a small hunting group, approached the boy in the early morning hours when the Vorthen had moved about 30 meters away to investigate something at the edge of a water source. The Skelari were fast, coordinated, moving in the spread pattern they used to encircle prey before closing. The boy ran. Not toward the edge of the clearing, not away from the Vorthen. He ran toward the Vorthen. The Skelari followed. The Vorthen turned. What the Vorthen did next is, honestly, the moment that changed everything. The moment that I keep coming back to. The moment I can't fully explain. The Vorthen stepped between the boy and the Skelari. It didn't charge. It didn't vocalize. It just stepped between them, put its massive body between this tiny human child and 11 Skelari hunters and held its ground. The Skelari stopped. They held their spread pattern for a moment. Then slowly they contracted, pulled back, dispersed. And the boy, I can see this in the thermal imaging, even through the abstraction of heat signatures. The boy pressed himself against the Vorthen's side, pressed his small body against this massive predator's flank. And the Vorthen let him. That was day 45. After day 45, the dynamic was different. I need to tell you about something that happened about 3 months in, because this is where my own role in this story changes. This is where it stops being something I'm just watching from 400 kilometers above and starts being something I'm part of. Commander Pellis received a communication from the Galactic Enforcement Bureau, GEB, the people who handle serious interspecies crimes, treaty violations, that kind of thing. They were investigating the circumstances of how HJM-01 had come to be on Krell 9. They'd traced the pod's origin. They had a suspect. His name was Vador Quellens, a human, a businessman. What the GEB described as a galactic commercial interest broker, which is a very fancy way of saying he arranged deals between corporations and did not always ask what was in the shipments he brokered. Quellens had a nephew, a sister's son, a boy named Eli. Eli Quellens. That was HJM-01's name. Eli. The reason Quellens had put the boy on Krell 9 is a story for another time. It involved an inheritance dispute, a family trust, a legal structure that made the child the only obstacle between Quellens and a very large sum of money. I'll leave the legal details aside. What matters for this account is simpler. Eli Quellens was alive on Krell 9, and someone with significant resources didn't want him extracted. Every time a rescue authorization moved up the chain, something slowed it down. A procedural objection, a jurisdiction dispute, a safety assessment that somehow never got completed. Pellis suspected interference from the beginning. She flagged it, documented it, pushed back through official channels. And while all of that was happening, Eli was on Krell 9, growing, learning, surviving. I started keeping a personal log alongside the official sensor records. It wasn't authorized. Personal journals about active monitoring cases weren't technically prohibited, but they weren't encouraged either. I kept it anyway. I needed somewhere to put what I was seeing that wasn't the sterile language of a BSU incident report. One entry from about month 4. He started doing something that I don't have a word for yet. When he moves through the territory, he makes sounds. Not distress sounds, not random sounds. Deliberate sounds a specific pattern, And the Vorthen, I'm going to call her Granite because that's what she looks like, that gray stone color, and because calling her subject a Vorthen for months has been making me feel bad, Granite responds to those sounds. Not every time, but often enough that I'm starting to think there's a vocabulary developing here. A communication. I know that sounds insane. I know the biology of Vorthen communication doesn't include anything that should interface with human vocalizations. I know that, but I'm looking at the data, and the data is what it is. Month 5. Eli found a water source today. Or more accurately, he found a water source that Granite had been using and started using it too, and in the process discovered that the mineral composition makes it safe for human consumption. The orbital spectrometer confirmed it. He didn't know that, obviously. He followed the Vorthen to water and drank what she drank, but it worked. His physiological heat signature is stable. He's maintaining weight. I don't know what he's eating. The kills are too messy to track precisely at this resolution, but whatever it is, it's enough. Month 6. The Skelari pack that attacked him in Month 2 has been circling the territory again. There's a new behavior I'm tracking. Eli hears them before Granite does, or at least he reacts first. I think he's learned their subsonic communication frequencies. Not consciously, he doesn't know he's doing it, but his body responds to the vibration, and he started making a low sound in his chest that I can only describe as a warning call, and Granite responds to it. She was moving away from a potential Skelari ambush 2 days ago, and she turned around before the pack was visible, before her own senses should have picked them up. She turned around when Eli made the warning sound. He is teaching her to listen to him. I don't have a framework for this. Month 7 was when I asked Pellis for permission to descend to the surface. She said no. I asked why. She said, because the Vorthen would kill you. I said, Granite won't. She said, not Granite, the others. She was right, of course. Granite had an established territory, but there were other Vorthen, other Grey Kings on the northern continent, and they had no reason to tolerate a strange alien suddenly appearing on their ground. The calculus that had kept Eli alive, too small, too strange, too different to trigger prey pattern recognition, would not work for me. I was adult-sized. I moved in adult patterns. I would be prey. I went back to watching. Month 9 was when the Skelari situation changed. Up until Month 9, the Skelari had been a constant threat, circling the territory, probing for opportunities, occasionally making runs at Eli when Granite was too far away to respond quickly. He'd learned to run fast. He'd learned to climb. The trees on Krell 9 aren't designed for climbing, the bark is sticky, the secretions unpleasant, but he'd found the ones that were less sticky, the ones with branch structures low enough to reach. He'd mapped them. He knew where they were. I could track his escape routes on the heat map. But in Month 9, something shifted. The Skelari stopped attacking him. This happened gradually over about 3 weeks. The probing runs became less frequent. The circling behavior changed. And then, one morning, a single Skelari, a young one, by the size of its signature, walked into Eli's immediate vicinity and sat down. Just sat down. About 4 meters away. Eli went still. I can see it in the data, his heat signature goes motionless. He was terrified, obviously. A Skelari at 4 meters is not a comfortable situation for anyone. But he didn't run. He made the low chest sound, the warning call. And the Skelari just sat there. For about 20 minutes they watched each other. Then the Skelari left. It came back the next day, and the day after that. By the end of Month 9, there were 3 Skelari coming to the territory daily. By Month 11, there were 8. They didn't interact with Eli directly. They didn't approach close enough to touch. But they came, they circled at a respectful distance, and they left. In Month 12, when a rival Vorthen crossed into Granite's territory and charged in Eli's direction, the Skelari, all 8 of them, moved between him and the intruder. I stared at that heat map image for a long time. Then I wrote in my personal log, "He now has 2 species protecting him. I need to tell someone about this. I'm not sure who." Climax, the long decade and the day I landed. I'm going to skip ahead now. Not because nothing happened in years 2 through 9. Things happened, extraordinary things. Things I have pages and pages of sensor logs and personal journal entries about, but because I want to get to the part of this story that I can tell you in first person. The part I didn't watch from 400 kilometers above. The part where I was there. Let me give you the broad strokes of the middle years first. Year 2, Eli stopped being a passenger in Granite's territory and started being an active participant in it. He learned the boundaries. He learned the scent markers. He learned the patrol patterns. There were 3 Vorthen on the territory by this point, Granite, and 2 younger ones I designated Dark and Ridge. He interacted with both of them, but Granite remained his primary companion. Year 3, the Skelari pack that had originally attacked him in month 2, all 11 of them, had by this point essentially integrated into the territory's social structure. They ran alongside Granite on hunts. They served as scouts, and they acknowledged Eli in a way that, in my scientific notes, I described as deference behaviors consistent with pack hierarchy recognition of a senior member. I'm aware of how that sounds. I wrote it anyway because it was accurate. Year 4, Eli's physical development was adapting to the environment in ways that were fascinating and alarming in equal measure. He was taller than average for his age, significantly stronger. The caloric density of Krell 9 megafauna meat, combined with the constant physical demands of surviving on the planet's surface, had built a physiology that was human but adapted. His reaction time, logged in the few instances when the sensors were close enough to capture microbehavioral data, was remarkable. He moved differently. The way he walked, the placement of his feet, the weight distribution, the constant low-level awareness, was no longer the movement of a human boy. It was something else, something that fit Krell 9. Year 5, a GEB investigation team arrived in orbit. They interviewed Pellis. They reviewed the sensor data. They acknowledged that the rescue complications were being actively obstructed and opened a secondary investigation into Vador Quellen's. Quellen's legal team filed a counterpetition arguing that after 5 years, the boy should be considered legally deceased, the inheritance trust should resolve, and any further extraction attempts would be an unnecessary risk to BSU personnel. The petition was rejected. The investigation continued. Nothing changed on the surface. Year 6, Eli began doing something that I still don't have a full scientific explanation for. He began marking. Not territory marking in the way the Vorthen do it, this was something different. He used the sticky bark secretions of the territory's trees, mixed with mineral compounds from the soil, and made marks on rock surfaces. Abstract patterns, consistent, repeating. Not writing, not language in any recognizable sense, but intentional, deliberate, repeated consistently over time. I have over 400 images of these marks from the orbital sensors. Xenosemiologists I've consulted have disagreed vigorously about what they mean. My personal view is simpler. He was working something out, processing something, leaving evidence of himself in the only way available to him. Year 7. A juvenile Vorthen that had been orphaned, parents killed by a territorial dispute in the southern range, wandered into the territory. By this point, the protocol around that kind of incursion was well established. The adult Vorthen would challenge, assess, and either drive off or kill the intruder. The juvenile was too small to fight and too young to be a real threat. Granite postered. Ridge moved to flank. And Eli walked between them. He walked between the adult Vorthen and the juvenile. He made a specific sequence of sounds I'd heard him make before in low-intensity situations, sounds I'd categorized in my logs as de-escalation signals. He kept walking until he was next to the juvenile. He put his hand on the juvenile Vorthen's flank. Granite stopped. The juvenile didn't run. By the end of Year 7, the territory had 4 Vorthen. Year 8, the Skelari pack had grown to 37 individuals. They operated in subgroups that patrolled different sectors of the territory's perimeter with a coordination that, if I'm being precise about it, I can only compare to a trained military unit. Year 9, I received confirmation from the GEB that Vador Quellens had been arrested on charges of attempted homicide and 3 counts of commercial fraud. The legal obstruction around Eli's extraction was removed. Authorization came through. Pellis called me into her office. She'd been my commander for 9 years by this point. She'd watched me fill shelf after shelf with personal journal volumes about a boy on a death world. She looked at me across her desk. She said, "The extraction team is ready to go down." I said, "I want to go with them." She said, "I know." She said, "Macron, you need to understand something. He may not." She stopped, started again. "The boy who went into that pod 9 years ago may not be the person who's on that surface." I said, "I know." She said, "You've been watching him for 9 years from up here. That's not the same as knowing him." I said, "I know, I still want to go." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Take the full extraction team, full tactical escort. Don't assume anything about the current behavior of the fauna. Don't rely on the sensor patterns being current." "And Macron?" "Yes. Come back." I landed on Krell 9 on a morning in what I'd come to call Eli's Year 10. He would have been 16 years old by Earth standard counting, if he was still alive, if the boy from the pod was still in there somewhere. Our ship came down in a clearing about 2 kilometers from the territory boundary. We'd chosen the landing site carefully, far enough from the core territory to minimize the chance of immediate contact with the fauna, close enough to approach on foot. The tactical escort team was 6 soldiers from the BSU's field unit. Sergeant Mara Voss, no relation to my surname, different spelling, was in command. She was thorough, professional, and clearly not thrilled about being on Krell 9. I respected all of those things about her. The moment the ship's hatch opened, the air hit me. I'd never been on Krell 9's surface before. 9 years of watching it from orbit, and I'd never breathed the air. The first thing I noticed was the heat. That oven warmth I'd read about, the heat coming up from the dark red soil, hitting you from below as well as from the sun above. The second thing was the smell, rich, dark, mineral-dense and biological at the same time, soil and something organic and vast, the smell of a place that has been alive for a very long time. The third thing was the quiet. There was no bird sound, no insect sound, no ambient animal noise the way you get in most terrestrial environments, just wind, just the creak of those multi-trunked trees in the copper-hued distance, just the sound of the soil settling under our boots. 2-kilometer perimeter sweep first, Mara Voss said. Everyone standard formation. We moved. The soil was soft under the surface layer. It gave slightly, not quite spongy, but with a give to it that made you feel the weight of every step. I kept my eyes on the terrain. I'd memorized the topographical maps, but there's a difference between a map and the real thing, and Krell 9 was making that difference very clear. At 1 kilometer, we found the first Skelari. One of them, sitting on top of a flat rock, watching us. Sergeant Voss held up a fist. We stopped. The Skelari was exactly what the sensor logs had suggested, about the size of a large earth dog, low-slung, with a blunt head and forward-facing eyes. Its coloring was dark, almost black with a faint iridescent quality in the copper light. It was watching us with an expression that I can only describe as evaluating, not hunting, evaluating. "Weapons ready," Voss said quietly. "Wait," I said. "Dr. Macron." "Just wait," I said. "Don't move, don't make any sudden changes, just wait." The Skelari watched us for a long moment. Then it turned and walked away, into the undergrowth. Voss looked at me. That's not normal Skelari behavior. No, I said, it's not. We moved forward. At the territory boundary, which I recognized from 9 years of sensor logs as a line of scent markers on a series of rocks, we stopped again. And then I heard it. That was when I heard the laughing. It wasn't quite laughter. Not the way you or I laugh, not bright, not open, not social laughter. It was lower, more contained. A sound that started in the chest that came up through the throat in a series of quick exhalations. But there was something in it that was undeniably, unmistakably human. Something warm, something that had survived. I stepped forward. Voss grabbed my arm. We haven't cleared the approach. Clear it behind me, I said, and I walked through the territory boundary. The path opened up about 30 meters in. Not a path anyone had cut, a path that had been worn down by regular use, by the passage of something large moving back and forth through the same route over years. The trees, those massive, multi-trunked things, grew thick on either side. The bark was dark and glistening with the secretion. The light came through in copper-filtered shafts. And in the clearing at the end of the path, I saw them. Granite was there. I knew her immediately. 9 years of thermal imaging, of tracking that particular large signature, had given me a familiarity with her movement patterns that felt almost like knowing her. She was larger than I'd expected. Thermal imaging doesn't quite convey size. She was enormous, 3.5 meters at the shoulder, that storm cloud gray hide, those copper eyes. She was crouched, watching our approach with the absolute stillness of a predator, deciding whether something is worth her attention. Dark and Ridge were at the edges of the clearing, flanking positions. And the 4 Skelari nearest to us were positioned between Granite and our approach, not aggressive but present, marking space. And in the center of all of this, sitting on a flat boulder, eating something I chose not to identify too closely, was a boy who was not quite a boy anymore. 16 years old. He would have been by Earth counting. He was tall for it. His build was lean in a way that comes from constant movement and high-protein diet rather than anything cultivated. His skin had adapted to the copper light of Krell 9 sun in a way that human skin doesn't usually do, darker, with a quality I can only describe as weathered, not unhealthily but thoroughly. His hair was long, tied back with what appeared to be strips of animal hide. He was wearing clothing. That surprised me. Not much, a garment made from something I recognized as Vorthen-adjacent hide, shaped and knotted, practical, not decorative, but made, assembled with intent. He was watching me. I stopped. He hadn't shown surprise when I walked into the clearing. He'd known I was coming. The Skelari had told him. The one we'd seen at the kilometer mark had gone back and reported. He'd had time to arrange this. He'd arranged this. He was sitting in the center of his territory, with his Vorthen flanking him and his Skelari between him and the new arrivals. And he was eating breakfast and watching me with the level, steady gaze of someone who is neither frightened nor particularly moved. I said the first thing that came to mind, which was not from any of the contact protocols I'd prepared. I said, "Hi." He looked at me for a moment. Then he made a sound, low in the chest, not the Skelari warning pattern I'd catalogued, something different, something I hadn't heard before. Granite relaxed, visibly. Her stance opened slightly, the rigidity left her massive frame. The Skelari between us moved aside. He set down what he was eating, stood from the boulder and walked toward me. His walk was what I'd predicted from the sensor data, human but adapted, that weight distribution, that floor of a dangerous world awareness. But seeing it in person was different from predicting it. He stopped about 2 meters in front of me. I said, "My name is Voss Makran. I've been watching over you for 9 years from the station." He looked at me with those steady eyes and said nothing. I said, "Do you understand me? Do you speak Galactic Standard? It's the language." And then he spoke. His voice was rough. Not damaged rough, rough in the way that a voice gets when it hasn't been used for social conversation in a very long time, when it's been used mainly for communication with beings who don't use words at all. But the words were words. Galactic standard. Accented in a way I'd never heard, a cadence that borrowed something from the rhythms of Vorthan communication, but words. He said, "I know what galactic standard is. I remember." 2 sentences, complete, grammatically correct. I stared at him. He said, "You're the one who's been on the station. I've seen the orbital light sometimes. Knew someone was up there." I said, "You knew?" Saw the reflection, regular pattern. Not a star. He glanced up briefly at the sky, then back at me, figured BSU. He deduced the presence of an orbital monitoring station from the reflection of a ship's hull in the atmosphere. At some point between age 6 and 16, on a death world, alone. I didn't know what to say. He did, he said. "Is it over, the thing with my uncle?" I said, "Yes, he's been arrested, you can come home." He was quiet for a moment. He looked back at granite, then at the Skelari, then at ridge and dark at the clearing's edges. He turned back to me. "Home," he said, like he was testing the word, measuring it. He said, "When?" I said, "Whenever you're ready." He looked at me for a very long moment, and in that look I could see the years, all 10 of them, the fear and the hunger and the cold nights, and the survival and the slow building of something that wasn't supposed to be possible on a planet like this. All of it compressed into the expression on his face, and none of it broken. He said, "I need time." Resolution. We stayed on Krell 9 for 4 days. I want to be clear, that was not in the extraction plan. Sergeant Voss's plan had been to make contact, confirm the subject's identity, and extract within 24 hours. 4 days was not the plan. But on the first night, after we'd made initial contact, and Eli had returned to the clearing without us, Voss came to me at the edge of the territory boundary, where I'd set up my portable observation post. She said, "The fauna haven't responded to our presence aggressively." I said, "No." She said, "The Vorthan, they're avoiding our camp but not leaving." I said, "No." She said, "And the Skelari are they patrolling?" I said, "Yes." She said, "They're patrolling the perimeter of our camp." I said, "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "He told them to." It wasn't a question. I said, "Yes." She sat down on the soil next to my observation setup. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "When we extract him, the fauna." "I know," I said. "We can't take them with us." "I know." "Will he?" She stopped. "Will he actually come?" I thought about that for a while, then I said, "He needs to work something out first." On day 3, Eli came to our camp. He didn't announce himself. He was just there, appearing at the camp perimeter in the gray pre-dawn when most of the team was still sleeping. I was awake, as I'd been most nights. I heard his footsteps, or rather, I didn't hear them, and then I turned and he was there, which is a distinction worth noting. He sat down across the small heat lamp I'd set up. For a while neither of us said anything. Then he said, "You've been watching for 9 years." I said, "Yes." He said, "Why? After the first year you knew extraction was blocked. Why keep watching?" I thought about how to answer that. I said, "Because you were there, because someone should." He looked at the heat lamp. "Did you have a name for her, for the big female?" I said, "Granite." He made a sound that I recognized after a second as a laugh. Not the outdoor sound I'd heard when we arrived, something smaller, more internal. He said, "I call her the same thing, in my head, Granite." I stared at him. He said, "It's the color, and the texture, and the fact that she never moves unless she decides to." I said, "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I used to talk to her when I was little, in the first years. I knew she didn't understand the words, but I talked anyway." He paused. Then I stopped using words and started using sounds. And she understood those better. I said, we logged that, the communication development. He said, you logged it. It's in the sensor records, I said. All of it, 9 years of behavioral documentation. He looked at me. You have 9 years of me recorded. Yes. He was quiet. Then, what do I look like in the data? I thought about how to answer that. I said, you look like someone who survived something that shouldn't have been survivable, and then went past surviving and I tried to find the word. Started thriving. He looked at the heat lamp for a long time. Then he said, I'm going to go with you on day 4. I said, okay. He said, but I need to do something first, in the morning. I said, I'll come with you if you'll let me. He looked at me. Then he nodded once. In the morning, in the copper light early morning of day 4, Eli walked to the center of his territory. I walked beside him. Sergeant Voss and 2 of her soldiers followed at a respectful distance. The rest stayed at camp. In the clearing, Granite was waiting. Eli stopped in front of her. She lowered her massive head, not a threat posture, something else. Something I'd never seen in any Vorthan behavioral documentation. He put both hands on either side of her face. He made a sequence of sounds. Long, complex, more elaborate than anything I'd recorded from him before. I tried to transcribe it in my field notes as he made it, but there was no notation system that worked for it. It wasn't language. It was something else. When he stopped, Granite made a sound in return. Low, resonant, a vibration I could feel in my sternum. He stepped back. The Skelari pack, all 37 of them, had gathered at the edges of the clearing. They didn't make a sound. They just watched. Dark and Ridge came forward. He touched each of them briefly, the same sequence of sounds, shorter. Then he turned and walked toward me. He didn't look back. We walked back to the ship. I walked beside him. The Skelari escorted us to the territory boundary and stopped there, lined up along it, watching. Granite followed as far as the boundary. She stopped. Eli stopped at the ship's hatch. He looked back once. Granite was a gray mass at the edge of the territory, copper light catching her hide. She didn't move. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped into the ship. The lift back to the orbital station takes about 40 minutes at standard acceleration. Eli sat in a seat in the ship's main bay and watched Krell 9 get smaller below us through the viewport. He didn't say anything for most of the ascent. At some point during the climb, when Krell 9 was a copper-hazed sphere below us, he said, "Will the territory be okay?" I said, "Dark and Ridge are mature Vorthan. They know the boundaries, and the Skelari pack is established." He said, "She'll be okay." I said, "Granite has been the dominant Vorthan in that territory for 9 years. She'll be fine." He nodded slowly. He said, "She was never, I want to make something clear." I said, "Okay." He said, "She wasn't protecting me because she chose to. Not at first. She was tolerating me because I wasn't worth the energy to drive off. I know that. I've always known that." I said, "I know. The data shows that." He said, "But then something changed, and I don't know exactly when, and I don't know how to explain it scientifically." He looked at me. "But it changed." I said, "Yes, the data shows that too." He turned back to the viewport. He said, "I used to try to remember when I was little. I used to try to remember what home felt like. My room. I had a room with a window. I used to think about that window, what you could see from it." He paused. "After a couple of years, I couldn't remember the view anymore. I just remembered that there was a window." I didn't say anything. He said, "And then after a while, I couldn't remember the window either. Just that there was a room, and then after a while, he stopped. He was quiet for a moment. After a while, I stopped trying, because Krell 9 needed all of me. It doesn't let you save part of yourself for somewhere else. You have to be all there or you're nothing." I said, "You had to let go." He said I had to let go. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Is there any chocolate on the station?" I blinked. "I'm sorry." "Chocolate," he said. "I've been thinking about chocolate for about 6 years." I stared at him. Then I laughed. Not a polished laugh, a real one, the kind that comes out when something catches you completely off guard. He didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth moved. He said, "Is that funny?" I said, No, it's I'll find you chocolate. I promise." Ending line. Here is what I told the Galactic Senate Tribunal when they asked me to summarize 10 years of observation data in 3 minutes or less. I said, what happened on Krell 9 was not a miracle. I want to be clear about that. It was not magic, it was not fate, it was not the universe deciding to be kind for once. What happened was a child making the most rational decision available to him in a situation that should have killed him, and then making the next most rational decision, and the next, for 10 years. Every single day, on a planet that should have been impossible, he made the decision to survive, and then the decision to adapt, and then the decision to belong, and in doing so he became something that we don't have language for yet. Not human, not Vorthan, not Skelari, something new, something that fit a world that fits nothing. They asked me what I thought the outcome of the case should be. I said, give the boy his inheritance, prosecute his uncle, and then leave him alone. He's the most capable individual I've encountered in 26 years of field observation. He doesn't need our protection. He never did. They asked me one more question. They asked if I thought there was a lesson in what had happened on Krell 9. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about day 45, and a Vorthan stepping between a child and 11 hunters. I thought about Eli's face in the clearing the morning we left, the way he'd touched Granite's face and made those sounds that I still don't have a notation system for. I thought about a 6-year-old boy in a survival pod, on the worst planet in the known galaxy, deciding that the best available option was to get as close as possible to the biggest, most dangerous thing he could find. I said, the lesson is this: the universe will try to break you with the things it gives you, but sometimes, the things it gives you become the reason you survive. He ruled them. Not because he was stronger, not because he was smarter, not because some narrative logic demanded a hero. He ruled them because he listened, because he showed up every single day for 10 years, in the one place in the universe that wasn't supposed to keep him alive, and he paid attention. He paid the kind of attention that only someone with no other option learns to pay. He ruled them because he stopped being afraid of the dark. And the dark, in the end, decided that was enough.